Hello, everybody. We are just kicking off our second panel session today, which is called Strategies for Educating in a Post-COVID World. We have got a scary level of experience in this panel, and I'm going to hand over to Dr. Jake Habgood from Sumo Digital, who is going to introduce his panelists. Over to you, Jake.
So good morning. Welcome to our panel on strategies for educating in a post-COVID world. I think it's a huge understatement to say that it's been a challenging year for education, and I think last year's conference had plenty of interesting discussion about the measures that universities were taking to address the effects of the pandemic as it was happening. So we thought to sort of make this distinct, this panel should focus on what happens next. So how should things or shouldn't things change for games education in the post-COVID era? So my name is Jake Habgood. I'm Director of Education Partnerships for Sumo Digital. With me to discuss this topic then, we have Nia Wern from Staffordshire University, Nick Gorse from Coventry University, Matthew Wilson from Priestley College, and Lynn Love from Abertay University. I'd like to begin just by asking you all to tell us a little bit about your role and your connection with games education, and perhaps we can start with you, Nia.
So hi, my name's Nia Wern. I am the course director for esports, game studies and communities. But that means I oversee a number of our courses in sort of those areas, especially the esports growing area. But I've been involved in teaching all aspects of sort of games and games education for coming up to 15 years. So I've been sort of at the forefront of teaching for quite a while.
Nick?
My name's Nick. I'm the head of School of Art and Design at Coventry University, so I look after the whole school of about 2,050 odd students. And I'm involved in sort of education for about 25, sadly nearly 30 years, and probably look it. But certainly been involved in developing games courses consistently for the last 20 years. So that's my sort of interest in the area.
Cool. Lynn?
Hi everyone, my name is Lynn Love. I'm a lecturer in computer arts at Abertay University. At Abertay we've been teaching video games for over 20 years now. We have about 1,000 students in the school studying video games across arts, production and programming. I used to be a program leader for about 7 years of the computer arts course, so I've got experience of curriculum design, and I also teach across our programming, design and arts courses, so I've got a good idea of the different disciplines.
Fantastic. Matthew?
Hi, I'm Matt Wilson. I'm the course coordinator for game design at Priestley College in Warrington. So I run a level 3 FE course. I've been teaching games for about 8 to 9 years. And we've most recently been involved in creating internships for our level 3 students into the games industry.
Awesome. So huge wealth of experience there to talk about this topic. So if I can begin then, the lockdown has obviously forced many changes in education over the last year. Which will you be glad to see the back of, and which do you think are here to stay post-COVID? I don't know who'd like to go first. Nia?
I'm looking forward to seeing students again. I've missed students. I think there's a common thing with all of our staff is that we've really missed seeing students face to face, and I've missed doing big sort of lectures and seeing them. So I think seeing students back on campus, having that buzz on campus is going to make a massive difference. Being able to ad hoc host things, those kind of things, or the little things that we've sort of missed, those sort of quick chats, I think seeing all those come back in will be really great. And just obviously the students getting to know each other as well. Like they really know each other as a cohort at the moment. And once we've got quite large cohorts of students, so seeing them all come back will be fantastic. So yeah, that's what I think, and I imagine most people are pretty much looking forward to that.
Brilliant. So obviously we've had a lot of screen time. How has that worked out, Matthew, with your students?
Initially, we were a bit concerned going into it. We wasn't sure whether with the students being, between 16 and 18, whether they'd get on board with it straight away, if we'd have initial dropout, if we'd see a dropout in attendance in sessions. But we were actually really surprised. They all got onto it pretty quickly, attending the sessions. We tried to keep things as normal as possible. So we didn't tend to change too many of the projects. We wanted to keep it as they were, essentially, which meant that they needed to attend. So that kind of helped a little bit. Hard things were kind of getting them to do what we're doing now, showing our face on screen, using their mics, something which you wouldn't necessarily think would be an issue with game students when they spend quite a lot of time online talking to each other. So that was a first hurdle, just to get them to turn the cameras on and speak. But once that was sort of, that kind of, we got over that little hump, it started to ease off a little bit and become a little bit more natural. I'm definitely looking forward to being more in contact with the students, seeing them in the classroom, more bouncing ideas off face to face, that sort of thing. More what we expect in a classroom that we've just not had the opportunity to do through a screen.
So have you seen any kind of sort of fatigue with online events, Lynn, or do you feel that some of that online activity has been beneficial and you'll keep it post-COVID?
So I think Abertay have been very clear that we're an on-campus university. So when the pandemic first struck, we were teaching online like the second day after lockdown. So we went straight online, but as soon as we could, we got students back on campus, because I think for exactly the reasons that Nia and Matt were talking about, it's just so important to have face-to-face time with students, to be able to talk to them, all those lots of lovely little things that kind of happen by coincidence, just by being in the same space. It's key creativity. So I mean, I think that being back on campus is going to be really quite important, and I know that a lot of students really benefited from that. We had some that didn't come because they were concerned about COVID, and we had other things in place for them. I think in terms of like participation in screen time and things, I think that oddly, there's this sort of stereotype that you would think that the generation that our students are in are always on computers and they're digital natives and they're comfortable with this, but I think that they are missing that physical experience, and I think especially for the first and second year students who haven't known anything different, getting back on campus is going to be so important. I'm not sure that was exactly an answer to your question, Jacob, but
yeah, I mean, I think that potentially leads into something we're going to go on and discuss, but before we do, then Nick, I mean, the lockdown for you at Coventry, I mean, that's had some changes in terms of the kinds of spaces that you're providing to students. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as soon as we could in September, we brought students back in and we honoured a sort of 5 hours face-to-face delivery, but it did mean we'd had to rearrange all of our spaces for social distancing. And I've obviously changed some of the behaviours about how we delivered stuff, because we were doing face-to-face delivery and synchronously delivering online as well. So it meant we had to invest in cameras, new microphones for some of our spaces, and also invest in some kit for students. One of the things we're conscious of, that a number of our students at home don't have the right type of equipment. So we invested in some kit for them, which logistically sending them out to various places was difficult, but it helped. So we've very much seen that. And one of the things we've been talking about the future, you sort of asked a bit about that, is that we will be doing both again. So we'll be doing synchronous face-to-face and online delivery, mainly because we think even in September, there'll be some students, international students in particular, that won't be able to get into the country, or the various different issues around that. So we think for the future, we want to extend the face-to-face delivery to more time delivering face-to-face, but we also recognise that we'll be doing both as well as online. And we've certainly talked about the fact that probably the approaches to things like lectures, some seminars, are going to be very different when it comes to how we deliver those. So it's triggered a bigger conversation about learning and teaching and pedagogy, which I think is really interesting, particularly in this subject area. So yeah, that's some things we've been thinking about.
Brilliant. Okay, so obviously there's going to be some changes there, but I suppose one of the things that sort of stuck out for me, and when we discussed this previously, was even if we wanted just to go back to how things were, would that be possible? Would that work, Nia?
I think it will take some time. I think it will eventually, but there's going to be, so one of the things we were talking about was how sort of the fatigue our students have when it comes to online events. like all of their schooling is and educationally they've just been online. So the idea of going, oh, here's another live event and here's another webinar and here's another thing, you can just kind of see them going, okay, that's nice. I think when the real world reopens and when events start happening, I'm not sure they'll necessarily know how to deal with them. And I think that's going to take a long time to kind of work out. And that'll be in a lot of situations, but certainly being able to talk to people or go up to people and show people portfolios or all the kind of things that we're used to saying with careers and those, I think is going to be like, yeah, go sit in this crowded room and talk to people. There's going to be just an element that's going to take longer for graduates and students to get used to that idea. I think they will, but it will just take time.
Has anybody else seen sort of similar kinds of problems? I mean, Matthew, your students are already coming back. How hard has that been?
Surprisingly, on the first couple of days of coming back, it was strange. It was seeing them back in the room, and there were a little bit of anxiety there, obviously, of being together in small groups and all the procedures that they've got to take part in order to make things safe and all of that. And they get into that pretty quickly. But I think, just to sort of agree with Nia as well, I think we've spent the best part of 12 months looking into a screen, and such as with our type of area, you know, they spend a lot of time in front of a screen anyway. So, you know, trying to get them away from that a little bit more and trying to improve sort of like a healthy work practice is something that I think we would need to look at now that they're back, so that we can monitor that a bit better. That's obviously had issues with them because of them reverting back into their own little spaces that they've had for the past 12 months. They're now back out into the open and with the group and interacting with people face to face. And for some of these students, you know, they just started to get out of that habit and start to become more open and more sociable in a sense. And the 12 months kind of stepped that back a bit. So I can see that there's going to be a bit more work to do. I think it's going to take a bit of time to get them used to that again. I think it's going to take a bit of time to get them to feel confident about themselves and about interacting with other people. And I think that's something that we've all got to manage and encourage as well.
And I mean, you're working with level 3 students, but Nick and Lynn, you've got students right up to sort of level 7. Would you say that's something that's true throughout? I mean, all students going to struggle a little bit with the real world for a while?
Yeah, for us, looking at it, we're just returning back now with the groups of students, and we've asked students whether they want to come back or whether they want to stay online. I was quite surprised how many want to stay online. So I think there's definitely an anxiety there, which is quite right across my school. Which is there. So I think we're right that the students are going to come back with a different perspective and different viewpoints. The other thing that's highlighted, I think, right across my school is the support we need for students around mental health. It's really highlighted some of those issues for us, and that's we as a faculty and then as a school we've decided to invest quite heavily in more support right across the band, because we know that anxiety level is quite high. And you know, students at whatever age they come to us, there is definitely seen that sort of growing worry, anxiety or concern around a number of issues. But I suppose what the lockdown has done is focus that a little bit more for those students.
And obviously at a practical level, then you've got students returning in sort of the first and second years now who don't know the university, don't know their way around. I mean, what kind of provisions will you sort of have to introduce for that kind of thing, Lynn?
So I'm sorry, bagpipes have just started, rather stereotypically. I'm in Scotland. I don't know if you can hear them, but it's very distracting. I've just moved house, so I wasn't expecting this. I'm sorry.
Sorry, did you hear the question?
Scotland. Yes, no, I did. So I just wanted to apologise to everyone watching. Yeah, so in terms of making adjustments for students that have never been, we're thinking very much about, we deliver term 3 over the summer, but we also, for the first and second year students, they'll be coming in from September. And we've been thinking about actually how we kind of onboard them, I guess, how we get them used to being in space, how we get them to come together. Also for our 3rd and 4th year students, you know, community building things, getting people back into the room together, getting them comfortable with that, if restrictions allow us to actually be back on site. Because I think, like Nick, we're planning to do a sort of mix of blended and on-site delivery. I imagine it's probably same across the board. But I think it's supporting students with the socially reconnecting, helping them to deal with all the different procedures, as Matthew was saying, about actually keeping themselves and each other safe, and making sure we have events that are safe and welcoming, that help them to get to know the staff, get to know each other, get to know the spaces and how they work, because we've had to redesign. So even students who've been in on-site previously, you know, before COVID, the spaces are all different. The way that we use the spaces are all different. So there's going to be a little bit of re-education that needs to take place in the first instance, I think. And I think just to pick up on something that Nick was saying about mental health, I think we've all seen huge increase in demand for mental health. But another thing that I think the pandemic's really highlighted is disparities in access to technology and internet, do you know, and how much that affects students' ability to progress. So I think that, you know, this online or blended method is probably here to stay. There's going to be a process of that moving forward, but we are really going to have to think about how we can have the infrastructure and how we can support students to make sure that if they do choose not to come on campus, they're not disadvantaged.
And I mean, have any of you been sort of looking at sort of remote working tools, like, for example, the Parsec tool that's been talked about earlier?
Yeah, we've been looking at a whole variety of different bits. I mean, one of the things, our problem is around bandwidth and submissions. It's just been a nightmare for us. So we've had to really support the students on how we do that, and then getting them access to the different types of software. So we've across the whole board, we've invested in a whole new social media sort of platform. So we've dumped Moodle and moved on to Owler. And we're also working with a whole range of different bits of software to sort of support the students. But it's test and try, really, because it has been a rush. And certainly that, I completely agree with the issues around sort of the capacity for students to get access to software, bandwidths, computers, all the rest of it is something we've focused on in sort of digital poverty approach for students. And that's something that we're going to continue to evolve. So we've worked with our student union to provide both machines and software to students that were struggling around that. So it's been a tricky one, and it's substantial.
Yeah. So we've looked at virtual desktop solutions to help with some of our students, but again, that hasn't been a totally flawless rollout where we've used them. And so where we, again, that tried and tested thing, and we'll put something in place and find that there's another roadblock somewhere, or a license won't work for something, or it just won't work with a VPN. So, and it's that kind of, great, well, now we have to go back and work something else. But we've managed to work out most of the things. But we're, again, that digital poverty thing, broadband poverty as well. So students going back to their, you know, houses which are in rural places with really poor broadband, or in cities as well. So that's the other thing we've seen. Even going back to where you expect broadband to be really good, they're not, because there's loads of construction work going on. So it really disrupts things. And all of those problems we've seen a lot of problems with students not really having spaces to work and not having quiet time to work. And yeah, that's balancing all of that and trying to make sure that everything is fair, and then has been a real challenge we faced.
I think, like, with especially with some of our students, and obviously we're at the starting point of studying games, and you know, very often we talk to our students about investing in equipment and such in the second year, when they're a bit clearer on whether this is the pathway they want to take, because it's expensive. So we've had first years which don't necessarily have the equipment at home, you know, so there's been massive struggles, and we've been relatively lucky, but I know numerous colleges that have not, and you know, we've had to change completely what we wanted to teach and what we should be teaching to those students, and the standard of obviously students coming through it at year one and even finishing their year two and progressing for university, the standard will have dropped because of that. One of the things that I know that I did from coming out of the first lockdown was the understanding that we could possibly have another one. We could possibly go into another lockdown. So, and also that blended learning. We were going to go back and have a little bit of remote and a little bit of face-to-face. So we managed to kind of readjust the program slightly so that it would accommodate that just a little bit better. Well, we managed to look for software that was free, software that ran on browsers, which was hugely beneficial, so that they didn't have to download things. There were a number of places, software that were giving away their licenses for periods of time, which I found like really good. But I also question, you know, that should be free for education anyway, right? Adobe, but you know, such software should definitely be free for education, and we shouldn't have to be paying for it. That has been a big hurdle. That has been a massive hurdle for a number of students, especially if they haven't had the funds to pay for those subscriptions. Broadband, we've had to supply students with broadband dongles and such and so on. You know, these are students that have maybe worked off, you know, their network on their mobile phones and such. So yeah, there's been huge challenges in it, and especially at the lower level, at the beginning of it, it's not what we set out to teach. It's not necessarily what we wanted to do, and that's reflected in the way we've had to change our submissions for exam boards and so on and so forth. But a good thing that has come out of that is the realization that there is software out there that does do the same thing, that is free and that is accessible, and that is becoming more and more obvious, and it's becoming more and more prevalent and accessible to. So there has been some good stuff that's come out of accessibility to certain things. It'd be nice to just see some of those bigger companies follow suit with that, definitely.
So one of the things that we do as a school is we pay for every student to have access to Adobe. Yes. So the whole Adobe suite, which it's a killer cost. You know,
we looked at that. It took right now to get that to happen.
Yeah, and so we've been doing that for a couple of years, but we are going back to Adobe to say, come on, you know, this is something that for education you shouldn't be doing. The other thing we trialed, and it worked kind of okay, is we ran a laptop loan scheme. So a student would get a laptop for the 3 years, and then would hand it back. And that we think we'll probably extend that out as well for people that have trouble with if they don't have the right equipment. So it's a tricky one because you've got a judgment call, but that scheme seems to be one that we're going to roll out alongside some. We've got some high-end machines that we're going to sling together in a room, because we've got IT labs that can't be used, you know. So why don't we sling these machines together so students can ghost onto those machines from home and use the software and hardware there. Doesn't stop the broadband issue, but it starts some of that discussion around accessibility. But it's one that we're all looking at a whole variety of different solutions. Like
some of the really good press of studios investing in schools and colleges as well to give out laptops and stuff, because as you've just mentioned there, Nick, we've done something similar with laptops, but it's more in a general sense for the cohort of the college. So their Chromebooks, I mean, they can't do what we need them to do, and we certainly can't afford to hand out gaming PCs or gaming rigs to our students. But we have seen quite a lot of studios, you know, invest in their local schools and colleges to help them out with that, and that has been brilliant to see. That is something that the industry should be really proud of, and I'd like to see that happen a lot more to help out with things like with software and hardware. That'd be amazing.
No, I mean, that's fantastic stuff that's been done by various different companies in that area. So it's great to have seen that. So, I mean, one of the implications of some of the stuff we've been talking about here is that, you know, as an inevitable result of the COVID situation, some of the kinds of assessments that you run have had to change, and perhaps, you know, the technical bar has had to sort of put down a little bit in terms of, you know, allowing for students who don't have access to the same equipment or the same hardware specs. You know, what will the universities be doing then sort of next year for those students that are returning to sort of bring them back up to where they should be? Lynn, do you want to take this?
Well, I mean, I think actually At Abertay, we haven't necessarily lowered standards so much, so what we've done is we've amended the academic regulations. So we've allowed students to defer modules and to have extra time, and also to condone a module, to try and account for problems that they might have in terms of access to technology, but also mental health and personal issues. And we have a lot of students that have ended up dislocated. They're not at home, or they've gone back to family, then they can't get back to their computer at their student flat and things. So we've looked at academic regulations more so, and also our support, our academic support services to try and help support students. So I wouldn't say that there's been a lowering of standards, but what it does mean is that students' workloads changed, so when they need the time and the space, they have it, but then these modules still have to get carried out at some point. So it does push some of the work, say, into the summer term, when usually they would have a break. So I think what we need to be mindful is that for some students, they've had a really tough year, and they maybe haven't had a proper break from their studies. It's not like they're having days off at home. There's the pressure of life, but also academic pressure. So I think we need to take that into account, in supporting students on the kind of pastoral side, rather than skills so much. But that might be, I'm not sure how other institutions have.
No, that's almost exactly what we've been doing as well. Certainly, we haven't, most of our stuff is coursework based, so we haven't actually changed a lot of that. We haven't changed from, we've got some exams, but not predominantly things are practical. So yeah, one of the things we found, and almost tying on from the software things, was a lot of the free software stopped at the point where we had a load of students that had referrals to do. So we suddenly had these students that were relying on things that were no longer available because, I don't know, universities like work in slightly different ways from how software development were working. So we suddenly had these sort of double disadvantaged students that were working very hard in the summer with less, and then that was quite an interesting thing to sort of, again, get around. Well, there's not that much sort of access to IT support and things. But yeah, I think it is. I don't think our standards have dropped at all, but we're much more aware of their mental health, and they're like supporting them, as you said, then sort of pastorally, than just sort of the technical side. But we've seen some stellar work from our students, and we've seen some students that have really blossomed in this last time. We've had some really great conversations and communications with them, and in some cases with students we wouldn't usually have talked to as much because they're communicating in different ways. We've seen some fantastic work, and they've engaged in things like Grads and Games. We've got students engaging with the rookies and things like that. So some of them have really benefited. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether all our sort of graduation compared to the year previously that graduated, that there's going to be a couple of years that sort of excellent students out there sort of looking for roles and things at the same time, I think.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that, because we've talked about a lot of the negatives, but actually some students are so resilient and have blossomed and have really thrived in this environment, and there are lots of positives to take away. There's the flexibility of learning online, the pre-recorded lectures, for students that are carers or have additional responsibilities, this way of working actually can work really, really well. And the portfolios and some of the work that's been submitted is just incredible. So I'm so glad that you said that, and yeah, thank you.
And I think as staff, we've leveled up a lot of our skills as well. So I know some of our staff were really pushing out the path with online stuff and things, but now we're all doing it. And I was one of the most resistant to recording lectures and things, but now to be able to produce stuff really easily and have a lot of more understanding about what we're doing has been a really fantastic thing. But that has added extra stress onto our staff as well. So our staff haven't necessarily felt like they've had a break either. So, and that's a big thing to sort of pencil in as we sort of look at the next few years about how we balance the workloads, how we balance students getting hold of us, how they feel that they can just get hold of us all the time because they're now used to us online, and all those kind of things. It's going to be bigger conversations, I think.
I guess another big positive is sort of the ability of the industry just to kind of drop in virtually into your sessions. Has that been a good experience for you, Matthew?
I mean, I was having this conversation yesterday with my second years and my first years, actually, because we were talking about the careers week that's taking place. And I was explaining to him that, it wasn't that long ago that FE struggled to get connections with the industry, that it was very hard to get anybody from a studio to come into a college and give a talk or come in and get involved with an FE course. That's changed dramatically over probably the last 5 to 6 years, but in these last 12 months, it's exploded. We've got way more connections now with industry. It's so much more easier to get somebody to come in and speak and talk to the students. My second years who are in FMP right now, they have a mentor per team from a studio, and they meet each week, so they get regular feedback off that, and that's all done remotely. Now that couldn't have been done before this. That wasn't something that was necessarily easy to set up. It is now. There is some major advantages to what's happened, and accessibility is one of those major things for it, and especially for us particularly. And all FE, I think most colleges around the UK have really got onto that and has been able to do that. You know, some of the initiatives as well, you know, Intergames have done an outstanding job this year with their connections and building up awareness and getting people from all types of studios, AAA to your indie developers, to get involved and talk about their stories and how they've got into the industry. All of those things have come off the back of this, and you know, or has been accelerated because of this. So I do see the benefit in it, and that's something that I'm really grateful for. And the students can definitely see that. But it's one of those. I go back to something that Nia said right at the very beginning of this talk, and that was there's a little bit of exhaustion with screen time, with online, and I worry a little bit that some of this is being passed. It's not getting used as much. So we've got it really sort of really strong, thick and fast right now, and I'm hoping that it can level out a little bit so we can really take hold of it as we go into next year and the year after that and the year after that. I definitely want it to stay in this sense because it is so accessible. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that sort of fatigue with online resources was something Ian, I think, was talking about in an earlier session. So, what about the next intake then? So in terms of students that haven't had the COVID experience, but perhaps they've had the stories passed down to them, the experiences of this year's students, are they affecting the sort of the applications and sort of attitudes of the next generation of first years then? Nick, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think it is actually. We've seen a drop in numbers, actually, applications for the games courses at Coventry. It's I mean, the arts subjects in general, there's a drop across the board, but it was noticeable that games was lower than some of the others. So we are looking to see how we can sort of support what that really means. So we are doing some work to find out, is there a reason for that? But it has seen a drop, which is a worry. So we are exploring what we might do back into schools or colleges to support sort of better progression.
Yeah, we've seen a similar thing. Actually, we were talking about it in another staff meeting this morning. We're wondering if students are biding their time and waiting to see how universities a student are going to be in September. Because I think one of the things that the current cohort coming up is they're very aware of stories that have been in the press about terrible situations or being locked in halls, which hasn't been the case for most universities. But I think they're very aware of the media portrayal of students in the last year, and they're very keen to make sure they know what's going to happen. And we think that there are lots of people sort of biding their time and holding decisions. We've seen a push in people looking closer as well. So we previously had quite a we still have a very national view on our applications, but we've noticed a lot more are local. We already have a lot of commuter students because of where we are, but I expect we're going to have more of those. So I think the halls will look less exciting because that's a different kind of situation, those kind of things. So yeah, we're definitely seeing a trend downwards, but I think it will pick up. And I think as students, we had this a little bit last year as well, where students will eventually realise that if they don't go to university, they're not really sure what else they're going to entirely do. Then and there's only and I think there'll be a bunch of people who didn't do stuff last year who will also be like, well, I'm not further along anywhere, and my peers are starting to catch up to me. So I think it will pick up, but it's definitely a different cohort that'll be coming through. But but hopefully also a cohort that are a bit more used to this idea of blended learning, sort of down with the tools. We were surprised at how our students took them a long time to get used to, like Microsoft Teams and things like that, because it just wasn't software that they were used to. They kept just referring to it as a boring version of Discord. But yeah, they were used to some of it, not what we were like, well, we can't just shift all our teaching to Discord, we have to use this. And they're like, oh, but so yeah. So that kind of thing was really interesting. But hopefully we'll have students who are much more used to the tools that we'll be using for how we teach.
We're a bit of an anomaly, I guess, because we haven't really seen too much of a dip in applications. I don't know if that's because our principal has been really very vocal about us being an on-campus university, and he's been pushing on-campus contact, and you know, and we've been working really hard with our online open days and our applicant days and getting staff involved in producing content to really and staff and students, sorry, because the students' opinion I think is much more important for applicants, but you know, making sure there's engaging online content so people get an idea of what they're getting themselves into, what university is going to be like. And we're also very much like, as soon as we can be back on campus, we will be. So I think that's been beneficial to us. What we have seen, and I'm sorry to mention this word in the panel, but we have seen a bit of a drop off in European applications because of Brexit. So there, you know, but I think that as Nia was saying, you know, we are still recruiting really well locally, and in Scotland we call it RUK for England, Wales, and which I feel really strange it's rest of the UK, but we're recruiting really well kind of nationally. So we feel really kind of quite fortunate about that. But I don't know if the narrative that our principal has been promoting publicly is the same as the other universities, or whether that may be a slight difference.
Because one observation sort of I have from perhaps the Tiger universities that I talked to is that the universities that were very decisive about moving to online learning perhaps had a better sort of experience, and the students were more positive about that than the ones that sort of went in and out and had sort of the flip-flop that the government sort of caused there. I mean, I don't know which Abate, was it Abate able to move very quickly to online? Or?
Yeah, so the day lockdown was announced, the next day we were teaching online. And throughout doing on-campus teaching, we've also offered, in the games department, certainly we've offered the same experience, or as close as we can to the same experience online, because we appreciate some of our students are international, some of our students have health issues, so can't come on campus. So students could then choose, and I think that choice, as well as the speed, which, don't get me wrong, this was a huge demand on staff, you know, overnight to switch to online delivery. And I'd never used Teams before the pandemic, and I'm with the students. Discord is much better, but it's, you know, it's the software we're using, and it works for the task. But I think that the speed and the narrative and that choice and flexibility, I think, has worked really well for our students. And maybe that is why we haven't seen so much of a drop, because the narratives the students are then giving out to other people that are thinking of applying, and are, you know, all the things that are going on online about our reputation, you know, hopefully that's helping. But I'm not sure. That would be speculating.
So your point there about sort of staff workloads then is the perfect segue into a question that's been asked in the Q&A then. Sort of pointing out that it's not just the mental health of the students that's been a problem during the pandemic, and that actually where staff have been asked to particularly deliver material both online and in the real world at the same time, that's significantly increased their demands on them, but also that, you know, they've got more pastoral and support issues that they have to deal with as well. Would you say as a group that, you know, that's been something you've noticed with your colleagues being under additional stress? And I don't know if you know about that, Nick.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, we've because we rushed into it like everybody else to go online and deliver stuff, we didn't think about protocols. We have an email protocol in the school, which is, you know, very much around, you know, it's a 9 to 5 process. You should only do these emergencies, don't expect a response rate and all the rest of it. But we didn't do that through our learning and teaching. And so we are now seeing staff quite exhausted, being asked to do additional stuff at various times. And because the other problem we've got with our international students is the time differences. So we're having to deliver some of our courses at 5 o'clock in the morning or later in the evening. So we've had to look at how we rotate that around and think about that. So it is it is a real key issue for us to look at making sure that staff have those breaks, and we put in place some better protocols around learning and teaching so that everybody understands where it is that they're not in, that students and staff are not expected to get a response back immediately, which is what started happening. So certainly colleagues' days just got longer and longer and longer. And if you look at my diary, there are no breaks. So people just slot things in and put things in, and then it just gets bigger and bigger. So it is about being quite forceful to say we need to operate like this and work in a way that gives people breaks, time out, and also that majority of us are working from home. We've had to make do. You can see my office. Had to make do with various things like that. I don't have any children, but I've got 3 kittens that make an appearance every so often. So you've got to get into that sort of vibe about thinking about how to be professional, but also how to have time to sort of take those breaks, which I think is really important. And we've been quite poor at doing that, if I'm going to be honest. And we've talked about it in the whole faculty to say we've got to, as we progress through into the summer, because I'm delivering courses in the summer, to change that approach.
I think one of the things we've seen, because of the model that we started with in our college in particular, we did a week on, week off across the year groups, and we continued with the timetable that we got. So we were teaching pretty much as it was on a regular timetable online, and we had to adapt to that pretty quickly. I mean, it's been consistent throughout the entire process where everything's been pretty last minute in some aspects of decisions, and some of those were mirrored in education. You know, what are we planning for? What are we planning for this? How long are we doing it for? You know, we had to change certain aspects of programs that are already in place, and we'd set that up before the actual lockdowns and stuff. And so, you know, it was a huge undertaking by staff across the board in all areas to have to adapt to it. Not all places have done the same thing. Not all places have done it particularly well. Some places have done it terribly, and some places have done it really exceptionally. But the stresses and strain that's put on staff isn't talked about, I don't believe, at all as much. I mean, we spoke about the troubles that some of our students, well, that's what we're facing. That's what we're dealing with day in, day out with those students, because we're their first port of call. We're the people that are speaking to them on a daily basis. And then, you know, when that camera gets turned off at the end, we're left with what we're dealing with, and we're, you know, been locked up in the same house, and we've, you know, we're homeschooling our kids, and we're, you know, doing all the things that we would normally have to do, whilst at the same time trying to figure out if we're delivering what we should be delivering remotely, trying to keep attainment up, trying to keep students focused, doing the best that we can, learning all the new skills that we've got to do as well at the same time, learning on the job massively. It's been a massive undertaking. Burnout is often talked about in the games industry, burnout in education. I know a number of staff, I'm one of them that suffered with burnout. It was after the first lockdown. It was insane how drained and how demotivated one person can get very quickly after being taxed so quickly and so massively on a scale that lockdown is created. So yeah, I think there is a lot to talk about with regards to how staff in education has dealt with it in that sense, and I don't think it has necessarily been talked about enough, and it's only starting to happen now, and the support is only really starting to come through now. And I think the priority has always been students, you know, and that's fine, and that's okay to a certain degree, but we've got to be able to look after ourselves and best practice and so on to enable us to do that.
Great.
I'll just want to make one point just quickly, because I know we're running out of time, but it was just about intake for you guys, and because we look at it from both sides. So we've got coming in and going out. There's a less of excitement at the minute for my second years. They're not eager at the minute to jump in, and I don't know if that is across the board with FE. It's definitely not because we're not promoting it. It's definitely not because of anything different, but there is a sense of uncertainty, and there is a sense of that there's not that excitement there. So I will say that just to add to that previous point. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, I think, that whole sort of discussion around the mental health of both staff and students is a sort of really poignant topic to finish on. So thank you so much for discussing these issues and giving us your thoughts. And I think we're just about out of time there, aren't we, Rick?
We are. What an interesting discussion, and a real under the bonnet look up there. I really appreciate that. We are about to take another break, and so thank you all to all of our panelists and to Jake for chairing that. We've got coming up next, we have a keynote from one of the pioneers of online education in the UK, Simon Nelson, who's now at Nord Anglia Education, but whose team created the iPlayer at the BBC, and then he went on to create this huge online learning platform for the Open University called FutureLearn. I think that's going to be really interesting. He's going to be talking about what is the current state of the art in online education. So back in 10 minutes, see you then.
Cool, way off.